So we're going to look at the purpose of the presentation, give us a little intro, of course look at some scripture, and then give you 3 points to consider. And depending on the time, we might do a little exercise. So I'm not going to give the generic beware of certain movies presentation. I'm going to try and give you just some things to think about and use myself as an example. And I'm going to try and keep it as real and honest as possible. All right. So raise your hands if you've ever watched a movie that had a line with a lot of profanity, like a lot of swearing. Keep your hand up if you've ever watched a movie with a ton load of swearing, and to be honest, every other line was a lot of swearing. Now, keeping my hand up for myself now. Let me know if you've watched a movie that had a lot of things that Leviticus kind of looked down on. Maybe it had a lot of sorcery, a lot of things with the undead, a lot of things with necromancy or wizardry, stuff like that. Or a movie that was all about that. Hands are still up, and I suspect a lot of people's hands are still up, and I'm speaking for myself. And we're going on violence. Raise your hand if you've watched anything with a little bit of violence, and then keep it up if you watched something that was really, really violent, so much so that you'd feel uncomfortable describing it to someone else. So again, looking at my own hand that hasn't gone down, keep your hand up if you've ever watched a movie that has had a bit of nudity, like honest to goodness, nakedness. And now keep your hand up if you watched something that had good amounts of nudity, like serious, a lot of exposure and things that probably shouldn't be seen. And I'm speaking for myself. Raise your hand if you've ever watched a movie that had tons of nudity, and to be honest, that was part of the point of the movie. And you watched it, you really wanted to see it, and tons of sex and tons of stuff like that. And guess what? Lightning and thunder didn't happen. Confession is good for the soul. So everyone is like, okay, what should we think about? So the answer is scripture. So Philippians 4:8 says, finally, my brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, just, pure, lovely, good report, any virtue, think on these things. We have in 1 Corinthians 6:12, all things are lawful unto me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but I'll not be brought under the power of any. Psalm 101:3, I will set no wicked thing before mine eyes. I hate the work of them that turn aside. It shall not cleave to me. Psalm 11:5, the Lord trieth the righteous, but the wicked and him that loveth violence his soul hateth. Titus 2, for the grace of God, for Titus 2:11-12, for the grace of God that bringeth salvation hath appeared to all men, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world. And then this is another one. Mortify therefore, this is Colossians 3:5. Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry. So let's look at some even heavier ones. This one is a big one, and I'm so guilty. Ye have heard, this is Jesus talking, Matthew 5:27-29. Ye have heard that it was said of old time, by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her, hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. That's a heavy one. And if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast in hell. Put that into context. This world says you can see and look at whatever you want, and it doesn't matter as long as I don't hurt anybody. No, God cares about the things that we think about, the things that we focus our energy on. He really cares. So put up your hand, and Ray Comfort does this all the time. If you've ever looked at someone with lust, and keep it up, if you plan to, and you're happy to do it, and you do it all the time, and still up, and you will watch movies where you know that that's the point of the movie, or a lot of scenes in it. All right, and I'm speaking for myself, and I'm sure, I suspect a lot of us, we can say that. Continuing, Mark 7:20, and he said, that which cometh out of the man, defile the man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, and foolishness. And all these things come from within and defile the man. So be careful of what's inside of you. Galatians 5 looks at the works of the flesh, and these are given in contradistinction to the fruit of the Spirit later on. First Timothy 4:7 literally says, refuse profane and old wives' fables, and exercise thyself rather unto godliness. Straight up, just don't entertain these things. Leviticus 19:31, regard not them that have familiar spirits, neither seek after wizards to be defiled by them. I'm the Lord your God. Psalm 19:13-14 warns us about presumptuous sins and says, God, please don't let them have dominion over me. And that famous one, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer. And 1 John 2:16, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but of the world. But this very, very key one that will be the crux of this presentation. Galatians 6:1, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. So that was a lot. But let's put this into practice, some practical things that we can keep in mind going forward. Why do people watch movies? People watch movies because they want to learn about, or even remember, a real one, a good story. Sometimes they watch it because they want to have an emotional response. They want something that moves them. They want an intellectual response. They want something that makes them think, or spark their imagination. Sometimes people also want to be entertained, whatever that means. And sometimes you want to step out of this world into another one. And finally, I'm going to say people have tons of reasons that vary from person to person and even situation to situation. So you can add your own. For me personally, I think Christians should check themselves and the director on these three things. I think you should check your motives, your original discretion, and your original discernment. And I'm going to explain what these are later, but for now, let's look at some examples of the first set of points, and so that we can get to explaining what the crux of this is. So when I think of movies, I grew up with, my mom loves Stephen King. His stuff ranges from zero of any, frightening, intense content to something that has all kinds of intense content. But whatever he does, with whatever level of content he has, it's something that's going to make you think. It's going to create an emotional response. It's going to make you think that this alternate world is real, and you're going to be drawn into that. The Rock, I associate with comedy movies. I associate him with action movies. But I love the world that movies that I associate with him presents. It's a world you want to be in, you want to enjoy, you're engrossed in it. And that's what I associate with him and his movies. Kevin Hart, I can't take serious even if he's in a serious movie just because of, again, my associations with him. And I guess putting depth on the idea of entertainment because his energy is unique to him. You can always feel him wherever he is. And that's what makes him fun and convincing. I tend to associate with more serious movies that deal with more intellectual and emotionally, I guess, burning issues. Not that she as a person is limited to that, but again, she moves me in the worlds that she is presented. And Angelina Jolie, she's been in a lot of movies that I knew growing up, and she's presented in a variety of roles in all kinds of movies, in all kinds of movies, in all kinds of content. But what I often remember is that those movies tend to have great stories, memorable, powerful stories with interesting scenes, and she's often presented as um, a strong, beautiful female character that a lot of people have great respect for. Not always, but you know. And then Scarlett Johansson, I searched hard to find a good pick because not all of them were like decent for something like this. But she is somebody who has a bit more edge to her in a lot of her characters, but she can also be not so edgy. But whatever role they put her in, whether for beauty or for other roles, she is somebody that people remember when she plays a character either by her voice or physically. And they kind of want when she is interacting on screen, you to remember the emotions associated with that. And that's very key to the point I'm going to make next. So here come the actual content that people always keep track of when discussing whether or not to watch a movie. And I posit to you, and this is the main point of this presentation, that you should keep track of your motives, your discretion, and your discernment in a manner that looks at the director and looks at yourself and looks at the context in which you watch the movie. In other words, if I say to you, I'm not used to profanity, and then I say I'm going to sit down and watch a movie with tons of profanity, it's going to affect me as a person because maybe my mind is filled with the sound of it and it makes me more want to speak like that. If I watch a movie with tons of violence, I'm not necessarily going to become a violent person, but certain things are going to be normalized and maybe I'm going to be a bit more desensitized. It's the same thing with things that are suggestively dark. Me personally, maybe I didn't think of that thing that they're trying to present. Sometimes it's incest, sometimes it's different dark um, rituals that people do, or sometimes it's interesting ways to hurt yourself or to hurt someone that maybe you didn't think of. And then last but not least, and I'm speaking for myself, I'm easily triggered by nudity and sex. I personally will say I have problems with it. And as a result, me being sensitive to myself, I have a very, very low tolerance for that kind of content just because I know myself. For other people, it might be a situation where they might have been physically or sexually abused as a child. And it might be that it and violence might trigger them into very, very bad emotional states. Or they have self-confidence issues and all these things. All of them might bring them up. It's also the fact that the director, as I mentioned earlier, is taking advantage of your desire to be intellectually or emotionally stimulated. And he or she uses all of these things to make the movie memorable and emotionally and I guess intellectually stimulating. So again, these things exist in the world. People, all of them, they exist in the world and they are part of life. But in movies, they're presented for the purpose of getting you to want to stay watching the movie and to watch more movies like that and accept the world that the director is trying to create. And if you understand that these things are used in the movie for a purpose, you're no longer just a casual consumer of the movie. You realize that you are somebody who the director is directly trying to manipulate, again for viewership and consistent viewership. Moreover, when it comes to the people and the context in which you watch the movie, whether it be you might be on a date with somebody or with a group of friends, with family, that context affects you watching the movie, because there are certain movies you wouldn't watch with certain family members. There are certain movies you'd kind of want to watch by yourself or with other people, and there are certain movies that certain people would want you to watch because it makes you feel like you're a part of the group. And why I use the word original in terms of describing discretion and discernment is sometimes discernment and discretion go beyond just looking at the movie itself, and they go further into the idea of the context and your reasoning for the movie. In other words, because you want to be a part of the group, or that certain friend says you should feel comfortable watching this movie, then you're going to watch it. But sometimes the friend A is being careless in terms of what they are choosing to be comfortable with, or B, you are being careless in listening to them. Regardless of the reason, you have to know within yourself that you are going to go beyond the desire to pander to people and their expectations of you. Because when they are done saying you should do this, they're the same ones who will step away from you and leave you alone to deal with the issues within yourself when these things trigger certain things within you. And why I say discernment versus discretion, because discretion as the world defines it, for example, they say viewer discretion advised. They might say, oh, in this movie you'll see 10 people's heads being cut off very violently and with tons of blood, and then this person will be cut up into 10 pieces, and maybe you should use your discretion now, watch it. Or this movie describes an orgy between 15 men, 15 women, and 2 dogs and 2 cats. And you say, okay, my discretion says not to watch it. But discernment goes a bit further to say, okay, I personally, as I said, might be triggered by this, or you personally might be triggered by that. Or this thing that I didn't think about, I really don't want in my mind. And because of that, I'm going to be a bit more cautious than usual. And because I know that the director is doing these things on purpose to manipulate me or persons like me, I'm going to be a bit more cautious, not just to prove I'm some kind of holy person, but because I know myself. And I know the context that I'm in, and I know the movie world that we are consuming movie from. And it is because of that context, I'm going to be a bit more careful. I'm going to not bash myself or bash others, but be a bit more considerate when choosing what to watch, or not being afraid to be in the middle of something and saying, if it's going to continue like this, maybe I need to step away. But the most important thing, as I said, is to be honest, be considerate of people and their circumstances, and admit that we're not perfect. We are prone to be, I guess, have emotional or intellectual reactions to things, and that's okay. But when we're honest with ourselves and we're practical about what will and will not incite us, then we can make informed decisions that can help us to just be healthier people overall, as well as more spiritually minded. And that's kind of what I want to get at with this presentation. I want, when we are as young people are picking movies to watch either by ourselves or with friends and family, for us to be honest with ourselves, honest with the impacts that these things have, and see where we can consider what we've watched already and what we plan to watch in future in a way that will help us to grow as young Christians, as young people, and as human beings. Because these, as I said, as I emphasize, these people know what they're doing when they're making the movies, because they know why people watch it. And I just don't want us to take that for granted. I don't want me to take that for granted. And to show how serious I am, the activity is really just